Factoring by grouping, take 2. I was so excited to have my system working like normal. I didn't press the record button, so starting again. So what we're going to be doing here, it's called factoring by grouping because step 1 is that we group. So that's why it's called factoring by grouping. This is on page 40 in your notes. All right, so what we're doing here is factor by grouping. And one of the ways that you know when to use this is because you're going to have 4 terms to start with. 1, 2, 3, 4. Every time you hit a plus or minus, new term. So that's how we're going to know when to use this. Also, we should always look to see if there's a GCF, a greatest common factor. But what you will find here is that there's not something that goes into everything. Like 7 works for some of them, 4 works for 3 of them, 3 of them have a B, but they don't all have anything in common. So that's why we have to use grouping. So we're going to start out by grouping them into pairs. And normally I just kind of slide some parentheses in there. I will go ahead and rewrite that here just so we have it here. So that's my first group, and that's my second group. Not such a big deal about whether that plus is inside or outside. When it's a plus, if it's a minus, it should be inside at first. So I should probably just be consistent and put it inside all the time so that you're not tempted to do that. So just going to stick the plus sign inside. There we go. All right, so now looking at the first 2, what do they have in common? 7, yeah, and B to the second. So just like what you just did, you're going to do GCF twice. Factor the GCF out of each pair. So just looking at the first 2, ignoring the second 2, these first 2 have 7b squared in common. So that's their GCF, and then inside parentheses, that would be 3, and then b. 28 divided by 7 would be 4. Now look at the second 2. What's their GCF? Be sure that you go as big as possible. So their GCF is 8. And it is positive 8. So they're both going to get divided by 8. And when I make this division step, what should be in the parentheses should now be the same. If it's not the same, you need to back up the truck and take another look. Typically, if it's not the same, it's because someone hasn't taken out the greatest common factor, or perhaps just something silly like didn't write down the problem right. Once we're here and our 2 sets of parentheses match, we group what's on the outside into its own set of parentheses, and then the part that is inside that matches now only needs to be written once, because as one of our classmates shared with us last week, when we were talking about multiplying binomials, that you can rewrite that last answer as 7b squared times the 3b plus 4 and 8 times the 3b plus 4, and then think about distributing. And distributing is exactly how you would check your answer. So you would do all 4 parts like FOIL, and you would find there's nothing here that combines like terms, and you should get back to your original question. All right, so that's page 40. There's another example we're going to do on the back. At least on mine it's the back, on page 41. All right, so this is focus question 3. Sorry, you didn't have a focus question 1. Focus question 1 is actually already worked out, so I figured I'd give you ones that we had to work out. We still start out by grouping things into pairs. And this one does have a negative by this third term, And so it's going to be very important when we do our grouping that we put that negative inside the parentheses. If we leave it hanging on the outside, it looks like it's making both of them negative, and that really isn't the case. So my 14x cubed minus 49x squared, and then negative 12x plus 42. So looking at the first two, find their GCF. Both divisible by 7, yes, and x to the second. So then we're dividing them both by that to figure out what goes on inside. Again, this is just doing GCF for the first two, then GCF for the second two, as if it's two separate problems. So there's 2x minus 7. Now, when we do GCF for the second two, remember what we just talked about with GCF, greatest common factor, is how we don't want a negative like right next to the inside of the parenthesis. So when we have this, anytime this third one is negative, we're going to have a GCF here where we pull out a negative to get rid of that. So 12 and 42, 6 would be their greatest common factor, but we're going to make it negative 6 so that that first term is no longer negative. So negative 6 is here on the outside. Negative 12 divided by negative 6 is positive 2 with an x. 42 divided by negative 6 is negative 7. And now, happy because they match. Because remember, those parentheses need to match. So like if I hadn't divided by a negative, or if I only had the 2 turned positive, but it didn't have the 7 turned negative, they would not match. So then group what's on the outside, it gets pulled together in its own set of parentheses, and then the part that's the same now only needs to be written once. Keep in mind, this could also be written this way, with the 2x minus 7 first, and the 7x squared minus 6 second. It doesn't matter, just like 4 times 3 is 12, and 3 times 4 is also 12. So the order of the entire parentheses doesn't matter. The order of the factors doesn't matter. What's inside the factors would be a different thing if you switch things around with a minus in there. Again, you can check by using distributive property. The way I had that, just in the order that it is, the way I first had it at least, is exactly in that order. You would get 1, 2, 3. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's no combining like term step. So you'll notice it goes on to something that looks different. That's tomorrow, so don't go on to page 42. That's for tomorrow. No going ahead of me. So for the first assignment today, you had a choice to do AA1 and AA2 on IXL, or to do the page that's within your notes and send me a photo. I do not have such a choice. We're going to go and I'm going to show you a few examples, especially since we've only done 2 of these, for AA7. All right, so that's where we're going next, is AA7. All right, so here we are in AA7, and you should notice right off, like, oh yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, and that the title of that lesson is Factor by Grouping, and the instructions simply say factor. All right, so you could have a bunch of factoring problems, and you should just know that you would do grouping because there are 4 terms. So I'm just going to start out with this first one. Again, first we're going to group them together. So that would be 18m to the third minus 9m squared, and then plus 4m minus 2. So for the first two, they have a 9 in common and m to the second. So then 18 divided by 9 would be 2m. 9 divided by 9 would be -1. No extra m's. Then I look at the second 2. What do they have in common? Not much, just a 2. And it would be a positive 2. So I'm dividing both of those by 2. So then that's 2m minus 1. And then I'm happy because my parentheses match. And what's on the outsides gets grouped together. So what we'll be typing in is 9m squared plus 2 times 2m minus 1. So 9m squared plus 2, 9m squared, oh, I need my parentheses. I was so, plus 1, and then 2m minus 2. No, that can't be right. This one is the 2, sorry. Should have written it down on paper. I was doing the check in my head to make sure it was going to work, and I saw it was not going to work because I had remembered it incorrectly. So here, instead of using our up arrow, we've got a little button to use for second power. There we go. Let's see if we jump a level, if things get harder. So the numbers get bigger, but not necessarily so much that it's harder. And if you're in class working on this and you just need a little help, like Miss Carolyn, what's the biggest thing that go into these two? Please ask me and I'm happy to help you with that. So 36 and 18. Another thing is sometimes just try to see if the smaller number perhaps goes into the larger number. Because like in this case, both pairs, the smaller number goes into the larger number. Yes, there are other things that work, but you want as big as possible. So for 36 and 18, it's actually 18. And you can test that. 36 divided by 18 on your calculator. Oh yeah, that's 2. All right. So if it goes evenly when you divide, then you know it works. And then j to the second. So I'm dividing both of these by 18j to the second, which is 2j. And then when I divide this one, I just get minus 1. And then the second part, check. Does 23 go into 46? Ah, it does, right? So 23 is our GCF between those two. And then this would be 2j minus 1. So then I have 18j squared plus 23, 2j minus 1. So 18j squared plus 23, 2j squared. 18j squared plus 23, 2j minus 1. So, parentheses, 18j squared plus 23, close the parentheses, new parentheses, 2j minus 1. All right, so if the very last one is negative, then there has to be one positive and one negative. So if you're at all hesitant, that's always going to work that way. One of them, but not both. So really just more of the same. I'm not seeing that this is going to be, I'm not saying it's not difficult, but I know you can handle it. When I get all the way to 64, I start getting some things with bigger exponents. All right, so now instead of the numbers being bigger, the exponents are bigger. So let's go ahead and look at one of these examples. I'd still like you to try to get to 80. Again, remember, if you get stuck before then, it is not, it's not like an all or nothing grade. and we have lots of grades. All right, so first two, again, try the smaller number, see if it goes into the larger number. So in this case, yes, 6 goes into 48. And they both have, smallest would be z to the 4th. So I'm dividing these both by 6z to the 4th. So this would be z plus 8. And this one would have no z's left. And then the second one, 2 does go into 16. So, I didn't make that in parentheses first to group it. So plus 2, and they both have z squared. I have a feeling it's going to want me to have taken out the common factor first. Well, I'm going to go ahead with this, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. Z plus 8. And then they both have z plus 8. And then when I group these things together, it's this. Now, here is the problem. The problem is that Miss Carolyn should have said, they all have something in common first. Now, maybe I don't really want to have to do the whole thing over again. So if I look, when I see that this, or either one of the parentheses, when I see that they have things inside the parentheses in common, that tells me that maybe I should have taken something out of everything first. And sure enough, a 2 and a z squared could have gone into everything. So the whole thing did have a GCF. So that I don't have to backtrack, I could just take it out of these two that have it in common and put 2z squared out here. And then this would be 3z squared plus 1 and z plus 8. And that's going to be what our final answer looks like. Now I'll do another one where I do it in the correct order. But also kind of just showing you that sometimes if you just kind of get on a roll and go the wrong direction, if you see that there's things in common inside the parentheses, you need to make an adjustment. So this is going to be, discard it, 2z squared, that's on the outside, parentheses, 3z squared plus 1, hopefully I wrote all this down right, and then parentheses, z plus 8. Okay, ready, and go. Woohoo! Okay, so this next one doesn't have as much in common, but do you see that every single term has a g? So this is kind of combining what we did in greatest common factor and grouping. So if they do all have something in common, and I did say before that's the first thing we should look for. If they all have it, it's going to go out to the side, and then what's left, 2g to the third plus 6g to the second plus 3g plus 9. So that first g, I already know he's going to be inside, or like inside the box, but on the outside by himself. So I'm going to kind of just like bring that down personally in my writing, and then I'm going to move these two things in groups. So now these first two, what they still have just those two in common would be 2g to the second. So I'm dividing these first two by 2g to the second. I get g plus 3. I look at the last two. What do they have in common? Oh, they have a 3 in common. Divide those both by 3, g plus 3. So then what's here on the outside gets grouped together. 2g to the second plus 3. The g plus 3 only needs to be written once, but then this g common factor from the beginning, he is still one of the factors. He is still part of the answer. He is just hanging out on the very outside. Instead of being outside of one set of parentheses, he's on the outside of this set of parentheses that are being multiplied together. Okay, here we go. G, parentheses, 2g to the second, plus 3, close parenthesis, open new parentheses, g plus 3. So there's lots of keeping track of those parentheses. Always take a look and make sure that like you have parentheses closed and you didn't accidentally have an equal instead of a plus, all those little details. Before you click submit, make sure that like what you've typed in does indeed look like what you have on paper. And it will look much more like it since we can use the squared button. So this problem, last problem I'm going to go over with you. This has probably become a little longer than I intended, but you should have some good examples, and you can always fast forward if you choose. So first, do they all have something in common? Well, they all have s to the second, and 5 goes into everything. You can't use 10 because of the 5, but 5s to the second. So I'm going to divide everything at the beginning. By 5s to the second, and I get 2s to the third plus s to the second minus 4s minus 2. And this guy, he's a common factor. He's going to be part of the outside of the sets of parentheses, 5s squared. The first two, group them together, second two. First two have s squared in common. I know, another s squared, how confusing. And then 2s plus 1. And the second two, we're going to have to use a negative, and they have a 2 in common. And then that would make this 2 positive 2s, negative 2 divided by negative 2 plus 1. What's on the outside gets grouped together, so s squared minus 2. And what happened twice only needs to be written once. And so that is my answer. Right, and so mid-60s before that happened, do your best. If I see that this is super troublesome, I might just call it at mid-60s. So touch base with me, but please give it your best shot. All right, thanks, and tomorrow we get to do my favorite thing in factoring. So I know you're excited. I can't wait to find out what my favorite thing is.